For most of his public life, the story of Barack Obama's heritage seemed settled. His father was Kenyan, his mother was white. The African half came from one side, the American half from the other. It was a clean narrative, and it held for decades. But in 2012, a team of genealogists released a finding that complicated everything. DNA analysis had uncovered something hidden inside Obama's family tree, not on his father's side, but buried deep in his mother's line. A line that everyone assumed was entirely European. What they found there connects the 44th President of the United States to one of the darkest turning points in American history. A single court ruling from 1640 that would set the legal foundation for centuries of racial slavery. And the connection runs through the last bloodline anyone thought to examine. To understand what DNA revealed, you first have to understand what everyone believed. Barack Obama Sr. was born in 1934 on the shores of Lake Victoria in western Kenya. He was Luo, a member of one of East Africa's largest Nilotic ethnic groups, a people whose oral histories trace their migrations from the Bahr el Ghazal region of South Sudan, beginning over 1,000 years ago. The Luo language belongs to the Western Nilotic branch, part of the Nilo-Saharan family, languages rooted in the upper Nile Valley stretching back millennia. Obama Sr. grew up in the village of Nyangoma Kogelo, a place of a few hundred people on the eastern shore of Lake Victoria. The Luo numbered over 4 million in Kenya alone, and their genetic signature told its own ancient story. A major 2009 study by geneticist Sarah Tishkoff examined 121 African populations and found something unexpected about the Kenyan Luo. Despite speaking a Nilotic language, they clustered genetically not with other Nilotic groups, but with the Bantu-speaking populations surrounding them, evidence of deep admixture accumulated during centuries of southward migration. Obama's father carried in his cells the memory of migrations spanning half a continent. He won a scholarship organized by Kenyan nationalist Tom Mboya, arrived in Hawaii, met a young woman from Kansas in a Russian language class, and the rest became American history. His mother, Stanley Ann Dunham, came from the American heartland. Her ancestry was traced primarily to English roots, with smaller threads of German, Scots-Irish, Welsh, and Swiss heritage. Her family were landowners, farmers, people who had been in America since before the Revolution. Genealogists had mapped her line back to colonial Virginia and beyond, to a John Dunham who sailed from Bedfordshire, England, to the Plymouth colony in 1630. There was also an Irish connection, a third great-grandfather named Falmouth Kearney, who left the village of Moneygall in County Offaly during the potato famine of 1850. Every branch of Ann Dunham's family appeared European. Every record confirmed it. So, when researchers at Ancestry.com began tracing her lineage as part of a broader project into presidential genealogies, they expected to find more of the same. English yeomen, colonial settlers, the familiar architecture of old stock America. They combed through thousands of pages of colonial records, marriage certificates, and property deeds. For months, every document confirmed the expected story. And then, deep in the Virginia records, they hit something that didn't fit. Ann Dunham's family connected to a line called Bunch. The Bunch family had lived in Virginia's York and New Kent counties since the 17th century. They were landowners, taxpayers, members of the community who appeared in quit rent rolls and county court records. On paper, they were white. They had been classified that way for generations. Their neighbors treated them as white. Census takers recorded them as white. No one questioned it. But when living Bunch descendants agreed to DNA testing, part of a separate Bunch family genealogy project, the results stopped the Ancestry.com research team cold. The Y-DNA, the paternal lineage passed from father to son across centuries, belonged to haplogroup E1b1a. This is not a European marker. It is sub-Saharan African. Specifically, the subclade E1b1a8a is concentrated in West and Central Africa and strongly associated with the expansion of Bantu-speaking peoples that reshaped the continent over the past 3,000 to 5,000 years. The Bunch family's genetic signature was African, and it had been hiding in plain sight for nearly 400 years. The question became, how? How does an African lineage embed itself into a colonial Virginia family, survive through generations of intermarriage with white settlers, and vanish from the historical record entirely? The answer lies in one of the most poorly understood features of early colonial society. Before Virginia codified racial slavery into law, the boundaries between races were not as rigid as they later became. In the 1620s and 1630s, Africans, Europeans, and Native Americans worked side by side as indentured servants. Some Africans were freed after their terms, some owned property, some married white colonists, and their children, under English common law, inherited the status of their father, or, more importantly, in Virginia, eventually their mother. This is where the genealogists zeroed in. They had African DNA in a family that had been considered white since the early 1700s. They had a surname, Bunch, that was extremely rare in colonial Virginia. And they had fewer than 100 African men in the entire colony before 1640. The paper trail and the genetic trail pointed to the same person. His name was John Punch. Punch was an African, likely brought to Virginia in the late 1630s. Some historians believe he may have been among the captives originally seized from the Kingdom of Ndongo in present-day Angola, taken aboard Portuguese slave ships and then intercepted by English privateers. He was bound as an indentured servant to Hugh Gwynn, a wealthy tobacco planter, Justice of the Peace, and member of the House of Burgesses in Charles River County, which later became York County. Gwynn's estates stretched across the tidewater landscape where the colonial tobacco economy was taking root, and the labor that built it was brutal, with mortality rates among servants exceeding 40% in some years. In 1640, Punch made a decision that would alter legal history. He ran. Together with 2 European servants, a Dutchman named Victor and a Scotsman named James Gregory, Punch fled north toward Maryland. 3 men, 2 continents of origin, 1 shared desperation. All 3 were captured. All 3 were returned to Virginia. And on July 9, 1640, the Virginia Governor's Council, acting as the colony's highest court, delivered a ruling that drew a line through American history. Victor and Gregory, the European servants, were sentenced to whipping, 30 lashes each, plus an additional year of service to their master and 3 more years of service to the colony. Extended punishment, but still temporary. John Punch received something else entirely. The court ordered that he shall serve his said master or his assigns for the time of his natural life, not additional years, not a fine. Life. For the identical crime committed by 3 men running together, the African alone was condemned to permanent bondage. No statute authorized this. No precedent in English common law supported it. The court simply did it, and in doing so, created what many historians regard as the first documented case of legal enslavement for life in the English colonies, more than 2 decades before Virginia even wrote its first slave code. Before we see what this evidence ultimately reveals about Obama's ancestry, if you're finding this story as compelling as we are, subscribe so you don't miss future stories like this one. But here is the part that the Ancestry.com team spent over 500 hours painstakingly reconstructing. Before 1640, John Punch appears to have fathered a son with a white woman. Because the child's mother was free, the child was born free. That son was likely given the name John Bunch, the P shifting to a B in the imprecise spelling of colonial record keepers, a common occurrence in an era when clerks wrote names as they sounded. John Bunch and his descendants inherited his mother's status. They were free. They owned land. They intermarried with neighboring white families. Within a few generations, the Bunch family was indistinguishable from their European neighbors. The African origin of their patriarch simply disappeared. Elizabeth Shown Mills, past president of the Board for Certification of Genealogists, independently reviewed the entire body of evidence. She weighed the DNA results against Virginia's laws and social attitudes of the period. Her conclusion was unequivocal. The Y-DNA evidence of African origin was, in her words, indisputable, and the surviving paper trail pointed solely to John Punch as the logical ancestor. What the evidence shows is remarkable in its specificity. First, the DNA itself. The Bunch family Y-DNA is consistent across 67 markers, leaving no doubt of common origin. The haplogroup places the lineage firmly in sub-Saharan Africa. Second, the documentary record. Before 1640, fewer than 100 African men lived in Virginia. John Punch is the only one with a name matching Bunch and a documented presence in the same county where the Bunch family first appears. Third, the timing. John Bunch the first appears in Virginia records by the late 1630s, consistent with Punch having fathered a child before his sentencing. What this rules out is equally important. This is not coincidence. The combination of genetic, genealogical, and geographic evidence converging on a single individual across nearly 4 centuries eliminates random chance. This is not contamination or error. Multiple Bunch descendants were tested independently, and the results were consistent. And this is not speculation about a generic African ancestor. The evidence points to one man in one county at one specific moment in legal history. What it implies rewrites the story of Obama's identity. Through his mother, the 44th president descends from the man who may represent the genesis of legalized slavery in America. 11 generations separate them. Genealogist Joseph Shumway described it plainly. 2 of the most historically significant African Americans in the country's history are directly related. One was the first person condemned to lifelong bondage. The other became the leader of the free world. But the story is not without dispute. Historians at Boston University challenged a specific claim in the Ancestry.com research, the assertion that Punch's DNA haplogroup pointed to Cameroon as his geographic origin. Their objection was precise and grounded in decades of research into the transatlantic slave trade. Before 1640, they argued, there was no slave trade from Cameroon. The overwhelming majority of Africans brought to Virginia on Portuguese ships in that era were enslaved in Angola, a region controlled by the Portuguese crown, where the trade was well established and documented. The haplogroup E1b1a and its subclades, they noted, are found at high frequencies across a vast swath of Africa, from Nigeria and Cameroon through the Congo Basin into Angola and beyond, a genetic footprint of the Bantu expansion that reshaped the continent over thousands of years. But because existing DNA databases contain far more reference samples from Cameroon than from Angola, the matching algorithms are systematically biased toward Cameroon. John Punch, the historians concluded, was far more likely Angolan. The DNA does not lie about its African origin. But where in Africa remains an open question, one shaped by the limitations of modern reference databases as much as by the evidence itself. There is a deeper irony that the genetic data exposes. Research has shown that roughly 4% of Americans who identify as white carry at least 1% African ancestry. In some southern states, the number is far higher, 13% in South Carolina, over 12% in Louisiana. The Bunch family is not an anomaly. They are a window into a process that played out across the colonial South, a centuries-long blending of lineages that America's racial categories were specifically designed to obscure. The 1662 Virginia statute of partus sequitur ventrum, which made children inherit the status of their mother rather than their father, created the legal mechanism for exactly this. Children born to free white mothers and enslaved or formerly enslaved African fathers were born free, and over generations, their descendants simply became white. Today, if you visit Nyangoma Kogelo in western Kenya, you can still find the homestead where Obama's grandfather Onyango lived, where the Eluo language carries words borrowed from Bantu neighbors accumulated over centuries of coexistence, and where oral traditions preserve the ancient migrations from South Sudan. And if you trace the other branch of Obama's African heritage, the one no one expected, the trail leads to a very different place, a courthouse in colonial Virginia, a July ruling in 1640. 3 men who ran together toward Maryland, through marshland and forest, risking everything for the same thing. Only one was never allowed to stop running. The man who became America's first legal slave left descendants who became free landowners, then white Americans, then the family of a president who made history as the first African American in the White House. Obama himself has spoken of the complexity of his identity. Journalist David Marinis, who traveled to Kenya and Indonesia to research Obama's background, put it simply. Because of the color of his skin and his father's background, Obama was African American. But culturally, he was not. He had to learn it. The DNA evidence adds another layer to that complexity. His African American heritage does not come from where anyone assumed. It comes from both sides of his family, through 2 entirely separate pathways spanning 2 different centuries, 2 different continents, and 2 radically different experiences of what it meant to be African in America. If this hidden chapter of history intrigued you, subscribe to explore more stories the evidence is only now revealing. Here is the question that lingers. If the Bunch family's African ancestry remained hidden for nearly 4 centuries, carrying through 7 generations of intermarriage before reaching Obama's mother in Kansas, how many other American families are carrying histories they have never been told?